mistakes, of omission or commission or mistakes, and that's why the nation is where it is today. But we have to agree, or we have to say what is factual. One of the things which is truth is that many economies in the world have registered a negative or have shrunk. The economies have shrunk. And it is true that the Kenya economy has grown by 5.4%. That's a fact. It is true that the inflation of this country last year was 9.2. At the moment, it's 6.8. This is as a result of the policies which this government has managed to make. It is also true that this nation gifted itself a very expensive constitution come in the year 2010. A constitution which must be financed, a constitution which was not costed. We did not ask ourselves what is the cost of running this constitution. And because we gifted ourselves such an expensive constitution, a constitution which has 47 senators, 47 women reps, 290 members of parliament, 1,425 or 50 MCAs, running one governor in an office for a year, it takes a lot of money. 47 deputy governors. We gifted ourselves as Kenyans such an expensive constitution.
Is the problem the constitution, or?
No, I'm not saying it's a problem,
yep.
but we have to look for ways of financing.
Yeah.
Because
those elected leaders,
in the previous government, Moi Kibaki government, we didn't have such an expensive constitution. Now, Kenya Kwanza government made a decision to lower the amount of domestic borrowing. And that's why banks in Kenya are not making money as much as they used to make. Because in the previous administration, domestic borrowing was a huge part of their way of doing things, domestic and external borrowing. President William Ruto came into office and said we have to lower the borrowing rate domestically and also externally. Now, banks make money from the interest they charge from people who are borrowing the money they have. Unfortunately, the previous administration, and of course I know Churchill here will say, is Churchill? Yes. We will say that we were borrowing. William Ruto was part of that government. Yeah. But when you are president, and for those who have been close to power, you realize that when whoever is the president has a lot of power in this country, not only in this country, but in major part of the president, major part of the world. Now, the decision to borrow domestically, of course, the interest rates, and this was motivated because some of these who are in office and banks and directors in shareholders in quite a number of banks, Rockery. So we are expecting banks not to make as much profit as they used to make because this government is not borrowing much in these banks. Okay. That's number one.
You'll proceed your point number 2, Honorable Ruku, just on account of accountability and clarity. First, the head of state does not practice in Kenya under our current dispensation untrammeled power because he has agencies that there are agencies under this constitution that also undertake other functions. Therefore, power is largely devolved and the president is subject to accountability and audit. Second, you talked about the question of expensive constitution, and largely you have talked about the elected leaders, be it at the county level or at the national level. Is our problem paying or financing the leadership that we have in the country, or we have other economic problems that the leadership current, the previous ones, and going forward, even the future leaderships in this country must address?
You need to check on the recurrent expenditure of the government.
How much is?
If you compare that the amount of money we get, or the revenues we raise as a nation, the amount of money we pay for our debts, out of the money we get, and the amount of money we use for our recurrent expenditure and what is left for developmental projects is almost zero for the government to implement any development project. So to finance education, to finance health, other sector, to pay our civil service, to pay the judiciary, which is a dependent arm of government, to pay the legislature, which is a dependent arm of government, the executive, the recurrent expenditure of this country is huge. Such that
how much in estimate, probably, if you can figure out a number?
Out of all the amount of money, revenue raised by the nation, by the country, once we pay our debt and we pay the recurrent expenditure, I think we are left with almost less than 0.5.
Okay, and this is the interesting bit, Honorable Ruku.
That is when you say, when you're talking about 10.
So it's just some,
get 10.
So it's a small part of it,
Eight shilling goes to payment of external debts and internal debts. Then we are left with our expenditure, where we almost spend everything left. And whatever is left for to implement development project is almost negligible.
Okay, and Honorable Ruku, this is the interesting bit, because it's coming down to policy and the responsibility.
These are decisions which the president and his government, and some of us who are supporting this administration, we have to make some of very difficult decisions on how we are going to get ourselves out of such kind of a hole.
Away from the difficult decisions, Honorable Ruku, because this is where responsibility lies at your doorstep as a member of parliament, because, look, in 2016, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission said we lose a third of our budget to corruption. That was corroborated by Chief Justice David Kenani Maraga, emeritus now, in 2019, when he addressed a gathering on anti-corruption summit at the Bomas of Kenya. That again further corroborated by President Uhuru Kenyatta, who said we lose 2 billion Kenya shillings a day in January 2021. This comes to about 720 billion Kenya shillings a year. That's if you address the cost of corruption. How willing are you as a parliamentarian? Are you going to support that? Second, when this comes against the backdrop of a bill that you have sponsored in Parliament, which according to the eyes of Kenyans is going to even further necessitate corruption, or even the corrupt, encourage the corrupt to continue stealing from the Kenyan public. You have sponsored a bill that largely, according to the EACC, is largely going to erode even some of the gains that you have made, and you are a parliamentarian. What level of responsibility do you have?
I have sponsored several bills in the Assembly, the National Assembly. One of them is the bill on Assembly and Demonstration Bill 2023, because there is huge cost to the economy which comes up with the issues to do with the demonstrations, violent demonstrations, and armed demonstrations. And Article 37 of our Constitution is clear, says that yes, Kenyans are free to do demonstration, but it put two conditions. There must be free, and violent demonstration and unarmed demonstration. So we have to put into effect Article 37 of our Constitution, and we can only do that through a registration, through an act of Parliament. Number two, Article 45 of the Section 45 of Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act 2003, which is supposed pre-2010 Constitution, Act, says that gives very vague ones which are not defined at the preamble of the Act, and which many lawyers have argued in court of law, and many corrupt Kenyans have escaped scot-free. They are enjoying corrupt monies in the Republic because of this Section 45, 2B and C, because of saying carelessly, willingly, ones which cannot be defined and which are not defined in the Act. So, for us to be able to nab those who are corrupt, for us to be able to prosecute, for the prosecution to be able to argue its case successfully in the court of law. And I can give you examples of the number of cases which have not been successfully prosecuted because of this section. Ask Anti-Corruption and Anti-Corruption Authority the report of the number of corruption cases they get every single year, more than 5,000 cases. How many are prosecuted successfully? How many are acquitted? Are in thousands. Why are they acquitted?
Well, courts of law, courts of evidence.
Sorry?
Courts of law, courts of evidence.
Yeah. It's because the prosecution cannot be able to provide evidence on how this person was careless.
What do you intend to correct that? Yeah, what do you intend to correct in that regard?
By ensuring that we align the economic, this act with PPRA Act and with Public Procurement and Disposal, Asset Disposal Act of 2015. Properly.
Okay.
So you'll find that these two acts, which are in procurement, are post Constitution 2010.
Okay.
So it is properly aligned with the Constitution. But this one of 2003 is not properly aligned with the Constitution. And once you injure one of the sections of the new Constitution 2010, then you fall flat in the front of our justice administration system.
Okay.
So we have to align some of these laws. And that's why I'm saying any member of parliament who is not playing his part properly in terms of giving proper, well-thought registrations, so that which can be used by our courts to nab those who are corrupt, then we are doing injustice to this nation.
Well, you aim to help the EACC, but the Commission says they are concerned about your bill and that of Honorable Peter Opondo Kaluma. Coming to you,
you know why? The EACC has. How many cases have EACC prosecuted successfully of economic crimes? Forget about the small cases which, running to go and arrest a police officer on the road. Why are we not prosecuting those who have interfered with the prices of coffee, of milk, of major industries, distorting prices in our country?
As a parliamentarian, as a parliamentarian, it's prerogative that, and I'm sure you understand this, that whatever the AICC gathers and the prosecution process takes place in a court of law and within a defined criminal justice system, and our courts of law are courts of evidence and the threshold to which they dispense justice, upon which after going through the presentations made in court. Javas, coming to you. The head of state, to quote him yesterday, said, along with the maturity of our democracy, Kenya's institutions of governance have evolved significantly. Parliament is now, he said, more than ever an independent, assertive organ of government with its own calendar and budget. As a result of this autonomy, party positions on important national issues are much more, he said, clearly defined, and whenever circumstances and the national interest demand, bipartisan engagement across the political divide is pursued in a structured way. On the judiciary, he talked about its independence and to provide the much-needed capacity to authoritatively discharge its constitutional mandate and make justice a right of every citizen. He said the judiciary is our nation's foremost anchor as the rule of law and continues to grow in its capacity to discharge its constitutional mandate. There seems to be two different serving points. Heaping praise on the judiciary, but to some extent appears to be also having doubts. He himself, the president, despite its autonomy about parliament. Is this largely because of its performance and underperformance?
Well, I wish not to join the growing choir of lamentations at the rooftop of discourse. I would like to give an incisive look on, yes, reflecting on the president's speech, what steps that we have taken through the ages for growth of our institutions. Yes, there is the mention of the judiciary. Yes, there is the mention of parliament and even the executive itself. I think over time we have pulled our socks from around the ankles. Our institutions may not be perfect, yes, but I think we have seen tremendous progressive growth in these institutions. Now, when it comes to judges, when Honorable Kibaki took the reins of power, I remember Honorable Kiraitu Murungi talked about the issue of the radical surgery of the judiciary. And later on, of course, through the new constitution, we have got even the JSC, and we have got complaints mechanisms about judges, and we've had even some judges leave office on the basis of accountability because of the checks that are in place. On the part of Parliament, yes, we know that Parliament has got its own challenges. The August House is a very important institution in governance as an arm of government. Now, beyond the issue of legislation, oversight and representation, that Parliament, of course, continues also to let Kenyans down. It is the Parliament where Mheshimiwa sits that, for example, under budgets for constitutional commissions, yet we know the Constitution provides that Parliament must ensure adequate budgeting and budgetary provision for constitutional commissions to execute their mandate, including independent officers. Parliament, yes, when it comes to its oversight work, a number of times Kenyans have lamented the issue of capture, that it is genuflecting to the executive, and because of the majority issue. And every regime wants to have majority in the House. But beyond the majoritarian aspect, I believe, personally, I am an originalist. And textual perspectives on originalism of the Constitution from its framing. I would want to say that our institutions are striving to meet that expectation, but they are a little falling short. And that is why, with regard to matters national honors yesterday, while it's good to celebrate those who've done great works for the country, including cabinet secretaries that were honored yesterday by various national honors, I think it was a bit too early. When the economy is in this state, one would wonder, for example, some of these cabinet secretaries that were feted, what remarkable achievements that are visible to the Kenyans are there that a finger can be put to. Now, that's not a mistake of the president, because we have got it in law, a framework that inquires and proposes persons that are supposed to be feted through such national honors. Additionally, I would say that when you look at the judiciary, yes, there is the operationalization of the judiciary fund that President Ruto has enabled in his term, a very good step. The other thing is, you remember during the Uhuru Kenyatta regime, the JSC, through the mechanism of recruitment and appointment of judges, recommended the appointment of various judges, including 6 to the Court of Appeal, and President Uhuru Kenyatta declined to appoint them. And President William Ruto appointed them as a first executive act when he came into office. Now, I look at it this way, that in terms of respecting institutions and their growth and their mandate, the JSC conducting its work, and remember the Attorney General even sits in the JSC, and the Attorney General is the principal advisor to government. When, for example, former Attorney General was in the JSC, did he raise issues about the suitability of those judges that later on the JSC, including the former Attorney General, recommended for appointment? Now, here we need to also respect the worth and the place of institutions as provided for in law. We must live under the rule of law, and walking on that path, appreciate that when we constrict the operation of institutions by way of budgetary cuts, for instance, by way of political interference, then we kill even that dream. The other thing is, look at it this way. In 1965, we had the sessional paper number 10 of Mboya that laid out matters to do with the plans for development in the country. Mwai Kibaki came in with Vision 2030. Today, as we sit here, we are only about 6 years shy to the sunset of Vision 2030. Now, we must conduct an audit on the implementation of the Vision 2030, where we are at, and start imagining, under the leadership of President William Ruto, because the sunset will come possibly under his reign, how we are going to imagine a new future for Kenya, a new vision, so that we don't just lament about where we are, but come up with critical policy and even developmental frameworks and proposals through national discourse, conversations as easy as this, but tough and cogent about where and how we need to move forward as a country. Okay.
Honorable Bill Okero, observing our culture ever since, and to you and of course Suba also, since we promulgated Katiba in 2010, has there been the principle, the living by of the principle of good governance and constitutionalism and the rule of law?
Very well. I think I also want to comment on a number of issues on the economy that Mheshimiwa talked about. But I think our biggest problem in this country is about governance. The reason why we have this economic crisis, the catastrophe that the President says we try to avoid, this is this is arising from bad governance. When you're talking of huge debts in the country that have been borrowed, Controller is saying we can't trace that debt. It has not been used for development. It's bad governance. But let me just contextualize it in respect to what my colleague has said on a number of these issues. One, when we were doing this constitution in Bomas, we did cost this constitution. It was not done out of the blues. I was there for a whole year. I was the chairman of a technical working committee for 3 of the chapters, public finance, public service, and security. And I know we hired experts from Nairobi University to do a costing. The challenge we have here, let me tell you, is because the government has not been able, central government has not been able to devolve some of the functions that should have gone to the county government. And so we have a situation where there's duplication. Many, for example, in Ministry of Agriculture, in Ministry of Water, in many sectors, you find functions that should have gone to the counties. National government is keeping it. And so we have ministries that have remained as they are. Budgets are still the same. So, I mean, really the question is not, and even when we find some of the actions by the government, today we are talking about the appointment of CISs. It's not the Constitution that created it. It's the executive that is doing what they want to do. So I don't think the Constitution can be blamed for the economic woes that we have. It's because of bad economic policies arising from bad governance. The second is, let me clarify also on the issue of banking. The government has not reduced borrowing domestically. As Mheshimiwa has put, what has happened is a number of banks have simply reduced the amount of lending they have given to the government. And this for obvious reasons. They are concerned about the debt burden of the country, the debt stress, and they are worried. And I'll give you an example. For example, Standard, you saw in the report a couple of weeks ago, Standard Chartered, they completely disposed of all their treasury bills and bonds completely, so that, and at a loss, so that they don't want to take a risk. Nobody wants to take a risk. That's why when the president came to power, domestically, they were borrowing. The treasury bills and bonds were at 9%. And he was saying, I will not allow it to go to 10. Okay. Today, at 18 is what the government is borrowing. Why? Because of that fact that no one is willing to take a risk really give to the government. But the government is borrowing. They have not reduced their borrowing. In fact, it's borrowing more than they've borrowed in the other years. And you will see that at the end of the 5 years. Because every time people are in power, they tell you we're not borrowing. Because the debt ledger, our debt management is shrouded in secrecy. We do not have. Today, if you ask anyone in government, you'll get as many different answers of what our debt is. They'll check World Bank, they'll check IMF, they'll check this, they'll check that. Nobody has a figure because the debt is always a moving target. Lastly, I want to also say that, you see, when you say the inflation is down from 9% to 6.8%, what you're trying to tell Kenyans is that the prices of goods and services have reduced. You go and ask anybody on the streets whether indeed the prices of goods and services have reduced in the last 1 year. Let me be.
No, my brother. Let me mention 3 things which are unfactual. Okay. And these are things which can be confirmed with the PS Treasury. Yeah. And
I'm not finished. I'll give you the time. Let him finish. I'll give you the time you respond.
I'm not finished. The reason is because those items that the KEBS looks at when it's determining our inflation do not necessarily look at all, the weighing of those things, and all those things all make an impact. So if you go by that figure, what you're trying to say is that because our inflation is down, then it means our cost of living, our cost of things are going down. No, the reality is everything has gone up, the prices have gone up, and those figures are looking at, those particular companies that do not necessarily impact on the lives of Kenyans. So I think I want to say very clearly that we agree, and based on your question, that governance is a major issue. Not in terms of whether our freedoms, we have freedoms more than many other countries in the region and many countries in the world. We have clearly a democracy, elections are held. I don't think that is the issue of governance, but it's governance in the context of managing institutions, managing resources. Appointments, you have a ministry, power disappears 3 times in a month, in 3 months, and no action is taken. Okay. Those are the kind of things, those issues of governance, the ones that are impacting on the lives of people.
On governance, so just hang on, let me give him the right of reply and then I'll come to Yes, please, and briefly, so yeah.
Parliament of Kenya changed the savings of borrowing to what we are calling...
GDP.
Yes, to GDP. We anchor the borrowing to GDP, debt anchor. That's there's between 45% of the GDP to 55% of the GDP. Before it was not like that. Before it was a searing of, say, Parliament passing and say it's 10 trillion Kenyan shilling, you can't go beyond that, or 9 trillion, you can't go beyond that. But at the moment, is to before this administration, the debt anchor was about 65%. But now the Kenya Kwanza administration is saying we have to bring it from 65% to maximum of 55%. But also you have to ensure that the Kenyan debt will not go below 45% of the GDP. Because debt is not bad. Every nation in the world has debt, including China and United States of America. Huge debt. But the truth of the matter, and you know it is extremely bad when Honorable Kero will pontificate himself as the super economist in this Kenya. When he knows clearly, he can get fact from Treasury. He can get fact from the PS of Treasury, Kipto. On the amount of debt which this country is borrowing internally.
You mean domestic debt?
Yeah, domestic debt.
Okay.
And the truth of the matter, compared to the previous administration, this first year in office of the Kenya Kwanza government, it has borrowed less than the previous administration internally.
You mean general borrow in domestic?
Domestic borrowing.
Okay.
Borrowing from our banks.
How much compared to the Kenyatta administration?
I don't have the actual facts, but I can get those facts in.
Well, you told him to access the peers.
No, that's the truth. That's the truth.
I mean, you have encouraged him, but you yourself, you have no facts over how much we have borrowed domestically.
Listen, I am sitting.
I mean, as a parliamentarian,
I am sitting.
Okay, honorable.
I am sitting with the PS Treasury.
Let's have some order.
When he was so distressed, because that day he was paying 29 billion Kenya shilling to the local banks. When the Treasury did not have that actual amount of money, that money could be used to other things, but he had to pay. And you cannot default paying those local debt.
In fact,
29 billion for a period of 1 month.
Exposure.
So the thing is, let's not just tell Kenyans untruth things just to paint this government as government which is not doing the right thing.
Okay, to tell Kenyans...
As a result, we are where we are at the moment because of the decisions we have made in the past administration.
We'll talk about that.
And this administration, is correcting all the mistakes which have been done in the previous administration to take this nation into the right direction.
Okay. To tell the Kenyan people the truth, then, can you tell them what our domestic borrowing is?
No, I can help him. You see, the thing is, the government policy now is to borrow domestically, to avoid the exposure of the foreign currency. This is the policy, because borrowing, that's why the other day they passed a supplementary budget, because they say it themselves, that the repayments have increased by almost 200-something billion because of the loss of the value of the shilling. So it is prudent for the government today to borrow domestically than to go and collect it in foreign currency. I think
the supplementary budget.
Now,
let me interject and say that, in fact, the motive for the social health insurance fund is for domestic borrowing. It's not meant to secure Kenyans, social welfare and health and so on. The president himself has pronounced himself severally that the reason is establishing the social health insurance fund is to create a pool of funds from which they can, pinch anytime they want. And we know the history with the National Social Security Fund and how it has been pilfered over the years. But it is on record, whether domestically or from foreign sources, that this current government is at 30% of what President Uhuru Kenyatta borrowed in 10 years. This government is barely a year in office, but is at 30% of what President Uhuru Kenyatta borrowed in 10 years. And that tells you the appetite for borrowing and the luxury and trips that we see on a daily basis. We have seen it on social media, Mheshimiwa, of, State House loans. At one time it is tarmac, at one time it is, pavement, at another time it is tarmac back and so on. That kind of expenditure at a time when you are asking Kenyans to pull their socks doesn't make a lot of sense. In terms of the growth of our, independence of our political parties, I still hear the echo of His Excellency President William Ruto threatening any MP to dare oppose the finance bill. Is that the independence that he was talking about yesterday? Is that how independent Mheshimiwa is? Look at some of the bills before the House, the National Assembly where Mheshimiwa sits, meant to undermine the functions and tenure of Attorney General. Is that the independence of institution? Is the Office of the Attorney General not established? By the way, we were with Bill Okero in the Bomas of Kenya. I was privileged to chair the Committee on Citizenship, Bill of Rights. And I know for a fact that, as he rightly puts it, we did costing of the Constitution. But any time members of Parliament talk about the cost of the Constitution, they don't see themselves, the 290 of them, still lacking quorum on critical issues just because the sitting allowance has been withdrawn. They think about the constitutional commissions, salaries and remuneration commission that should be made, part-time, because they are, spending a lot of public resources. I want to urge the Mheshimiwa here because, unlike Bill Okero, who is no longer a member of Parliament, some of the motions, the motions that Mheshimiwa has, fronted are completely, in my view, irrelevant to the people of Kenya. The motion that he ought to table is one that will ensure that the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, because the motive of establishing the Salaries and Remuneration Commission was to make sure that nobody sits in the decision-making about what they'll pay themselves. And that's what Parliament is deriving at.
Okay.
One of the reasons why our Parliament is not effective, and this, of course, is common knowledge, is when we allowed core principles in the Kenya Kwanza coalition to become speakers of both the National Assembly and the Senate. And we hear the public outcry, particularly from the Senate level. But more recently, we have heard it also from the National Assembly. Parliament is not independent. When we talk about strength of political parties, we want to urge the president, in the same breath that he calls on others to accept election results. We know for a fact that when we go to the election, senators are elected, members of the National Assembly are elected, MCAs are elected. When a sitting president spends resources wooing people who are elected on opposition ticket, that is not accepting. It's not different. We want the president to accept election results by recognizing, for example, that Tom Ojienda, the senator for Kisumu, was elected on an Azimio-leaning political party. That is, party. That is accepting election results. But there is this notion in this country that only presidential elections are disputed. Yet, the president, as we see him today, is yet to accept that. Those ODM-leaning MPs, whether they are from, some parts of Migori, Lang'ata constituency in Nairobi, were elected on ODM ticket. We want the ruling coalition to accept the fact that those people were elected.
But Churchill, I guess they were not driven to State House either. They went there on their own personal initiative. I mean, they are right-thinking members of the society. They were not forced to be at State House or to have relationship with the government of the day.
Yes, but when you go to somebody and say, I want to recognize that you were elected on an ODM ticket, can you keep your lanes? I mean, that is what traffic rules are about. Okay, but if we are going to,
to be fair, Churchill, to everyone, every party here, because we're having an objective discussion here, the head of state never forced anyone to be in working relationship with him. I mean, you have talked about the MPs from Luo Nyanza region. There are some who have also shown intention to work with him from the larger Western Kenya region in the counties of Kakamega, Bungoma, Vihiga, and Busia. I mean, these are right-thinking members who are independent and they went there on their own volition. They were never forced, is it?
Why then do we think that those who are objecting, disputing presidential election, are not right-thinking?
Or you're just...
I mean, why is it that those who are reluctant to accept outcome of president are not right-thinking, but a bunch of MPs, even as the president kept on telling, even before he was sworn in Karen, no handshake, but kept on shaking hands with members of opposition.
My brother.
That, for me, is a critical ingredient of our maturing democracy.
Okay.
If we really want to improve our multipartyism, if we want Parliament to be independent, there cannot be any independence of Parliament in the true sense of the word.
But Parliament can
when members of Parliament are wooed to attend church services with the head of state. There's nothing they have brought for the people that they claim, on whose behalf they claim to have crossed off.
But you agree with me, Parliament can be independent?
Parliament can be independent, but this particular one is the most disastrous. Unfortunately, Mheshimiwa sits in it.
Okay.
But I think it is the worst in the history of this country.
Thank you.
That has, lent itself to abuse by the executive.
Thank you. S. Javas.
Well, I do not agree with my brother Churchill Suba on throwing the wet blanket of dismissal on, one, the policies and legislation by the present administration, and also the issue of political relations or association liberally by elected members. As a matter of fact, yes, we know, for example, the reforms with the health laws. One, yes, there is the issue of encouraging domestic borrowing. But do we want to soberly argue here on this table that the people of Kenya are not going to be beneficiaries of the social architecture within the social legal, the social law, the health laws that are now in place? Secondly, we must also appreciate, for example, the president is talking about the issue of the housing levy and the framework to increase houses in the country. Now, we know very well that, yes, there is a shortage of houses. What we may want to argue is, with that percentage for the levy, is it that is the issue that we want to argue or prosecute a case for reduction of that percentage? Because I know very well, as a matter of fact, that housing needs remain crucial in this country. And yes, the agenda for creating employment opportunities for various cadres through the housing project is also very important. For the issue of association and the ADUM MPs that have inclined themselves or are relating with the president or the government, as a matter of fact, it is not the president's duty to determine and tell you that you are elected on a particular political party. Of course, there is the freedom of association in the Constitution, but as a matter of fact, and even that issue has been canvassed by the NADCO report, the issue around the political parties, that independence, the framework, and the issue of respect of institution of political parties. But honestly, the leaders that have been elected in parliament are sober people from the neck upwards. And they have not been driven to associate with the president or the Kenya Kwanza administration by the gun. It's not been placed on their head. Yes, I know, for example, as a matter of fact, that political elites continue to be the burden that misguide Kenyans. When I read books such as The Miseducation of the Negro, I also appreciate the miseducation of the common Kenyan by the political elites. Now, for example, when you look at the NADCO committee, Honorable Eugene Wamalwa sat in that committee. They had to discuss, deliberate on issues based on the agenda items. He comes out after the report is out saying that the cost of living aspect has not been properly dealt with. Yet he's a committee member. He's not told us, for instance, that he presented particular proposals that were not agreeable, say, to the side of government or even part of his delegation from Kenya Kwanza. Honorable Martha Karua, part of Azimio, dismisses the entire report with the wave of the hand. Okay. It is the political elites in this country that are the problem. And in fact, when we look at the growth that we have right now at the moment, when you look at the independence of parliament and even maturity of political parties, do you want to tell me that every citizen, even seated around this table, respect the laws and the policies that we have in this country? When it comes, for example, to issues to do with the treating of voters, election offenses. In fact, most people, including those who even point fingers of accusation at government or at even opposition leaders, themselves are guilty of going against the provisions of law. As a matter of fact, Ayub, I think, yes, in terms of the 60 years of growth, our literacy levels have gone up. And that's why Kenyans are able to appreciate discourse on policy and even legislation. Now, do you know that for the past 4 regimes, now the 5th, Kenyans have never queried the issue of how a government or a regime is going to pay for implementation of a manifesto. When we talk about appreciating, for example, Azimio Manifesto, Kenya Kwanza Manifesto during the campaigns, were Kenyans soberly asking themselves how, if whichever faction wins, they are going to pay for every aspect of the implementation of the manifesto? These things are crucial. Now, when you look at, for example, our education system, even though it has got its own challenges, I appreciate that the president gave it attention with the president's working party on education, especially looking at matters to do with CBC.
Thank you.
I think it is important for us now to look at it this way, that looking at where we are now, how do we, on the aspect of corruption, which the president said that no shilling is going to be lost, and we want to look forward to him cracking the whip very soon, on any person implicated on matters of corruption, because corruption affects the economic aspect of this country.
Thank you. Yes, Honorable Baruko.
It is extremely saddening to hear my brother Churchill that he doesn't understand the effect of multiplier effect. I mean, this concept of multiplier effect when it comes to the savings as a nation. That this nation, compared to other nations, even the region, Kenya is is the biggest economy in the region, but with a risk saving as a country. The internal saving of any nations are extremely important when it comes to getting resources to be pulled back to a government to do its own activities and also to repay the same amount of money. So when Churchill sits here and says that NSSF or other saving schemes which we have, including ASRA's fund, that is a waste of time and resources, then it's extremely saddening. But what I want to say is, we have to build a culture of saving as a nation. And from our savings, we can be able to borrow from our savings as a nation, and we can even be able to rent the same saving to other nations. We borrow money from other nations because they have enough money which they have saved as a nation. So we are encouraging the president to continue with that kind of decisions so that we can have enough savings as a nation and we can be able to borrow from. Number two, it's a fact that the cost of unga has gone down. The price of a packet of unga, Honorable Kero, it has gone down.
Which brand?
Almost all the brands. And that's a fact.
I mean, that's not factual. I was on a trip. Okay, yes, I'm going to... Okay, yes.
No, my brother.
Allow me to make my point.
I have a list of the prices.
Okay.
I have a list of the prices of all the brands of unga in our supermarkets.
I was on a tour with the CS Agriculture, Mithika Linturi, and the majority of the brands that he bought were either on promotion or were nearing out of stock. I even have the receipts of what he bought and counter-checked that with the supermarkets he was paying visits to here in the city of Nairobi.
What I can tell you, the fact is that the cost of unga in most of the brands and most of the supermarkets we have has gone down. If you go to Quickmart, Pioneer, Moi Avenue, there are brands like Mama, Taifa, Swan, Dora, Joymax, Jogo.
Retailing at Kenya shillings, 139?
157, 158, 158, 162, 164, 164, 165, 168, 170, 190, 199. There's one which is staying at 200, and that is Amaze. There's another one which is trading as 235, that is Ostes. The truth of the matter is, unga has gone down from the prices which we earned when this administration was taking power. So that's a fact, and also it is saddening to hear it coming from Honorable Kero saying that the prices of the commodities are still up. The prices of where I come from, we normally take a lot of viazi, potatoes. It's a fact that the prices of potatoes have come down.
Okay.
It's a fact that the prices of tomatoes and onions have come down.
Okay. To state my point.
So, but there is one thing which you have to address as a nation: the cost of power in this country.
Okay, we'll come to that. Hang on. We'll come to that. Okay, we'll come to that.
We have to ask ourselves, why is power so expensive?
I wish to look at it this way in terms of asking ourselves about the implication of the president's speech yesterday. For example, when you look at the issue, which of course we have not tackled properly, the issue of opening up our borders, the removal of the visa requirement. And while personally I laud it as a very wise move and proper, even countries in our global neighborhood such as Rwanda have done the same, I think now in terms of complementing that step by government, we need to see how the immigration department and the Kenya Airports Authority and the Kenya Airport, at the airport stops the issue of harassing visitors when they come. Because there is no need for us to open our borders, which is laudable, and then when you arrive, you find the hawks that are immigration officers coming for your neck and every property that you have. I think now we need to rethink that as we open our borders, then there is the decency that is expected. At the
including the Department for Refugee Services. Last week we had to petition because we have had people being harassed, people from fleeing conflict in Somalia. The other day we had to petition the Commissioner for Refugee Affairs over people who initially fled to Sudan. Sudan itself is in turmoil. And they have papers to show that they were Eritreans who ran to Sudan for safety. Now they crossed over to Kenya, and then they are arrested and declared to be in the country illegally. I mean, that declaration by His Excellency does not sit well with the actions that we see being carried out by the different departments, including the immigration that Bigambo has talked about.
I'll come to Honorable Kero. And Honorable Ruku, just because we had a debt issue, and I
want to comment on those.
And I did also inquire that you tell the Kenyan public about our debt and the borrowing, domestic borrowing, and because you have you have to hold yourself back on that. As of 30 September this year, 2023, the public debt stood at 10.5 trillion Kenya shillings, comprising of 5.67 trillion dues to external lenders, which is at 53.5%, and 4.92 trillion dues to domestic lenders at 46.5%. This is a record 23.7% growth from 8.56 trillion reported as at 30 September last year, just 16 days after President William Ruto took power. And these are figures from the Controller of Budget, just on a factual note. Yes, Honorable Kero.
Yeah, so let me clarify one thing. First, I think it's important to say that as this guys who speak a lot of English will tell you, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Most of these policies that this administration has come up with, we will see the effect, the success or failure of it in the next few months, and as we go on, we'll see. Most of them are still. But, the different economic policies have been used by different countries to achieve their growth. Look at the US and compare with Japan and China. You talk of savings. The US is the worst in terms of performance when it comes to national savings. You can't compare. US savings rate is 15-17%. Compare that to Japan, 25%, or China, 45%. So today, it is the largest credited nation in the world. And it's most of the money that you see in the US is money that farmers and folks in Japan and China have saved at the end of buying papers in that country. So it does, and that US policy is deliberate. They believe that in spending, in allowing their people to spend, they will increase the demand for goods and services. This is why it's today the largest economy in the world. So it doesn't mean that if we spend, we're not growing an economy. No. So there's a different perspective to that. And I think let's not focus only on saying that if we save, then we are going to grow the country. No, it doesn't. There are countries like US where spending is the one that is responsible for the economic growth of that country. But let me come to the debt. You see, clearly, I mean, it's not, you don't need to go and see Mr. Kiptoo to know that the Kenya's debt is growing. It's growing by leaps and bounds. And it's because every time you borrow a shilling, it's published. Whoever is lending you, it's on the news. In January alone, we are already seeing on the news how much IMF and World Bank is going to give this country. It's billions and hundreds of billions coming up. So there's no doubt. In the budget policy statement approved by Mheshimiwa and his team just a few months ago, they said in the medium term, up to 2027, this administration, in the document itself, in the budget policy, said they're going to borrow 5 trillion shillings. It's in the budget policy statement. My argument is going to be double that. The reason is very simple, because that 5 trillion is based on the revenue projections that are there in that document. We know clearly from what is happening now, those revenue projections will not be achieved.
Okay.
And what will happen? They will end up borrowing to bridge that gap. So prepare for a debt that is going to be double what is already in the budget policy statements, and the situation is going to get worse. I think it's good to tell Kenyans what to expect. Although it's good to paint a positive picture when you want to, but I think it's good. Otherwise, what Kenyans today are raising concern about is the reliability of this government in terms of its statements. The government says we're going to do this, it's not being done. The government says the price of goods are, people are going to supermarket and showing. Your media guys have gone to supermarket and said. So I think it's not good to cherry pick on what you want to show and say, in this place where I come from, the price of this brand is this. I think what we're looking at generally, the cost of living. Please, there's no way, Mheshimiwa, you can go to your constituency today and stand in front of people and tell them the prices of goods and services in the country have gone down because inflation has gone down. They'll tell you, what are you talking about? Everything has gone up, from the power they use in their houses, to the amount of money they put in their fuel, to the cost of the sugar that they're buying. Everything has gone up. So I think it's good to look at the general picture of the situation, to try and, rather than to try and, to maneuver things and tell Kenyans, Kenyans are smarter.
Let me give him, and then I'll come to Suba.
I have facts.
Yes.
A raid on the floor of the House by the chairman of Public Debt and Privatization Committee.
Yeah.
On that the assessment of the national debt in the period between May 2022 and April 2023. That between the said period, the government and a total of 19 externally sourced drones have been signed between the national government and a number of creditors, totaling to 182.46 billion. 182.46 billion. This is a motion. It's a motion, loans contracted by the national government between May 2022 and April 2023. Okay? So, and it is stupid where this 182.46 billion is coming from. Treasury bills, okay, worthy about 13%, treasury bonds worthy about 85%,
okay,
and government overdraft worthy about 2%. So please.
Okay, what are you driving at?
What I'm driving at?
We only borrowed 180 billion, that's what he's saying, the whole year.
What I'm driving at, these are the facts. I can send it to you.
Okay.
This is what we discussed in Parliament, laid down by the chairman.
What was the budget deficit you approved in the budget?
Of Public Debt and Privatization Committee. Yep. Let's not listen to the bloggers. Let's not listen to the social media. Let's get the facts laid down on the table of the House by credible sources of information.
So you said you are borrowing.
Yeah.
You said this is the money that was borrowed.
What you're saying is between May 2022 and April 2023,
yes,
this year, the amount of money which this administration are sourced from different creditors is 182.46 billion cash. Yes. And I can share this information.
Which adds up to the total debt that we have, is it?
Yes. So I can share this information.
And which I have read to you, according to the control of budget, it's now...
But you see, the way my friends here are putting it, and the way actually even yourself you're putting it, is that this government has borrowed more than, I don't know, 10 trillion, or I don't know,
no.
12 trillion.
I mean, okay, to be fair to you, to us.
Has borrowed, I don't know how many billion.
Okay, let me read you this. We'll sample the feedback. Honorable Ruku, it's a matter of having an objective discussion. We are all nationals of this country, and we aspire to have a beautiful country. But again, as a professional, I am required by the profession to hold those in power to account.
Do you have this?
And what I'm reading you is from...
Do you have this motion?
Okay, let's have some sober discussion. So let me read you what the control of budget has said. September,
we
2
have
months
seen
ago,
the control of budget say
2023.
No.
Okay.
We have seen the control of budget.
Will you allow me to read you?
No, not allow you to say that.
To you.
Because the
okay, it's my show, so let's have some order. Okay,
the control of budget cannot say funny things.
So we'll go to Kenyans and what they are saying on their feedback handle. The public debt stood at 10.95 trillion as of September 2023. So Lord Rick and Tim, let's get the feedback on X, and this is what you're saying. The Kenyan people on Twitter, former X, that is formerly Twitter, the hashtag is Daybreak, the SMS code is 22422. The first one from Leonard Masika, he says, I would wish to meet the advisor of President Ruto. Costings are totally different from what they said yesterday. He should be careful, as most Kenyans are reading deceptions every time he speaks. He has been told the negative impacts of free entry into the country. We are lost. This is from John Wangai, 19, says the picture portrayed by the control of budget of the spendings by the current government is a spit on the face of suffering Kenyans who are hurting under the pain of taxation and reduced incomes. But as always, our ruling class is out of touch with reality. Njene Lazaro says, don't rely so much on political speeches at every national functions ground. Things are different. The president chasing away investors with the punitive taxes, incompetent people at the energy docket, and consistent blame games without hope. And this from Wakasia. Wakasiaka says, Kenya at 60, what a political, democratic and economic journey for a country. Yes, we honor the patriots who set us on this path and the patriots who keep working every day in different sectors of our development. Up next is Wangai again says the political dishonesty and rent-seeking to please serving administrations has been our problem since independence. The speech might have been inspiring, but it does not represent the true picture of affairs in the country right now. Next is from Osiaka again. Kenya marks 60 years after independence from Britain. Since its independence in 1963, the country has had its fair share of struggles. While the wounds of ethnic violence are slowly healing, the economic situation is becoming unbearable. And MC Ruma says, did we really gain independence in 1963? We are not yet free. Our so-called independence was stage managed by the collaborators and the colonialists. 60 years later, Kenyans are more impoverished and hungry. This is not what our forefathers fought for. James Soma says Ruto's sweet presidential and fate of Kenyans today as different as day and night. When he tells the world how Kenya is doing well economically, it leaves us puzzled when Kenyans hear he is talking about when families can't afford to put food on the table. Okello Mwalimu is with the final tweet. It's sad that he says, while we are supposed to be celebrating 60 years of independence, those in power have found a new way of colonizing our economy. We need a new set of courageous and steadfast leaders who will deliver economic freedom. Our pockets are dry. We need solutions. I thank you, gentlemen. Your time is all appreciated. And thanks so much for the final Wednesday of the year 2023 here on Daybreak. And graciously throughout the year, you have accepted our calls to be here and looking into some of the subject matters that are of concern to the Kenyan people. Javas Bigambo, governance commentator, thank you. Honorable Bill Okero, political economist, your time is all appreciated. Suba Churchill, the executive director, Kenya, the civil society, that is the executive director of the Kenya Civil Society Center. Thanks for your time. Honorable Geoffrey Ruku, who is the MP in Mbeere North, your time is all appreciated. We look forward to another year of grace and prosperity, hopefully by the grace of God. And I wish you all the very best as we head into the new year. Thanks for your time as well. The broadcast continues here on Daybreak. Stay tuned.